Rosanna Maule, it's a book with Palgrave Pivot, 2016, and I also just completed a feature documentary on the role of women filmmakers and the visibility of women filmmakers who are active within fiction films, in collaboration with my colleague Elaine Dion, also from Concordia University, which should be out soon. And the title of my talk today is redefining the margin, the paradigm of taste and women representation of sex. And I will start right away. So, taste, how do you go like this? Okay. So, taste is an aesthetic concept, as well as a socially conditioned judgment, whose ideological underlying has been for decades the subject of inquiry in film and cultural theory. The discussion of taste in corrective approaches to film aesthetic informs my discussion of women filmmakers' representation of sexuality in two distinctively opposite sectors of women moving image production, pornography and the avant-garde. Nina Williams devoted the last chapters of her anthology Core Studies, the cover is here featured, 2004, to these two forms, which remarks are seemingly antithetical, yet, quote, have historically been the one place in moving image culture where a frank interest in sex, and specifically sex acts, is not taboo, end quote. The essays included in the last section of her book trace unexpected links among these typologies of films, pointing to their stylistic resonances and unusual treatments of the body on screen. As in Williams' anthology, my discussion of taste will propose a comparative analysis of these two film forms, so the avant-garde and pornography, or rather I should say feminist pornography, equally marginalized within the film industry and yet set at the opposite ranks of film aesthetic. My presentation will focus on 6 US feminist and queer-oriented filmmakers who are here featured, 3 operating within the pornographic film, Candida Royale, Annie Sprinkle, and Courtney Trouble, and 3 configured within experimental and independent cinema, Carolee Schneemann, here at the bottom line of the PowerPoint, Barbara Hammer, and Peggy Awash. Drawing on a theoretical framework inspired by feminist and queer theory, this paper advances that the approach to sexuality in the oeuvre of these activist filmmakers and artists relocates taste across cultural and generic boundaries, while simultaneously questioning mainstream representation and normative views of sexuality, body image, and gender identity. Before going to the specifics of my argument, an overview of the discourse on taste within film and cultural theory is in order. So the conceptualization of taste in film and cultural theory consolidated with the emergence of cultural studies, and it was especially the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's book La distinction critique sociale du jugement, Distinction, a social critique of judgment of taste, 1979, that put the foundation for a critical approach to taste in Western culture. In his book, Bourdieu considers taste a bourgeois construction, predetermined by one's economic position, class education, and cultural capital, that is one's training into one's proper taste. I should say that the book is heavily based on French culture and French taste. Bourdieu himself acknowledges the fact that it's almost an ethnography of French bourgeois taste. Close parenthesis. While in his study, Bourdieu treats all types of taste. For the purposes of this presentation, we'll concentrate on his definition of aesthetic taste. For this deed, Bourdieu suggests, taste implies detachment. According to Bourdieu, quote, The aesthetic disposition is one dimension of a distant, self-assured relation to the world and to others, which presupposes objective assurance and distance, end of quote. Within aesthetic perception, taste is the product of social hierarchy, education, as well as personal judgment, rooted in what Bourdieu defines, quote again, an ethic, or rather an ethos of elective distance from the necessity of the natural and social world, end quote. As you can read from the quotation here cited, which I won't quote again, taste also entails making exclusive choices, establishing a position or in reaction to others people's judgment, and progressively consolidating to natural inclination that Bourdieu defines as habitus. Within academia, taste became a new subject of discussion, albeit not a prominent one, given the chronic difficulty in settling class and identity politics within this area. In bringing attention to this issue, David James considered Bourdieu's Marxist-Weberian form of interventional taste, and I quote James in here, a powerful, albeit highly deterministic challenge to the end classes ideologies that still dominate the academic study of culture. And this is something that he argues in 1999, reprinted in 2004. So film discourse picked up this type of challenges when culture studies emerged in the discipline, starting from the 80s, more prominently in the 90s, with emergence again of an application of cultural studies into different areas of film study. And Williams was amongst the first scholars to address the question of aesthetic hierarchy in film genres from a gender-specific viewpoint. In her article, Film Bodies, Gender, Genres, and Access, she argues that the low cultural status of body genres is often associated with the display of the female body. The body genres, based on the spectator's physical and emotional reaction to on-screen representation, are structured on basic sexual fantasies that touch on deep problems and gender hierarchies in our society and culture. Following Williams' logic, low taste in film culture is a vehicle for acting out gender-specific repressed emotions, complexes, and drives. Some years later, Jeffrey Scones further articulates the critical functions of taste in the article Trashing the Academy, Taste, Access, and Emerging Politics of Cinematic Style, published in Onscreen in 1995, and later on expanded in his edited book, Sleaze Artist, Cinema at the Merging of Taste, Style, and Politics, 2007. Scones identifies in paracinema a taste formation non-conformed and firstly oppositional to normative aesthetics. The paracinematic audience defines itself in opposition to that of the aesthete and a mass culture. Even though paracinema starts as a counter-aesthetic, it soon infiltrates the very context that it criticizes, such as the avant-garde, the academia, and mass culture. Scones suggests that access is the mechanism that brings together opposite cultural formations, and he argues that access, and I'm quoting it here, access provides a freedom from constraints, an opportunity to approach a film with a fresh and slightly defamiliarized perspective, end of quote. From this viewpoint, and I'm quoting it here again, the aesthetic of access and paracinematic interest in access represents an explicitly political challenge to the reigning aesthete discourse in the academy. That kind of dominant discourse that David James lamented in the aforementioned article. The coming together of aesthetic and paracinematic discourses on cinema that Scones put attention on in his article through access resonates with the position of the avant-garde and pornography, and more particularly feminist pornography, that they share in their respective contexts of production. According to Scones, the first point in common between academic and paracinematic taste is the rejection of Hollywood cinema and mainstream US culture as stands that characterize both the avant-garde and pornography. As I'll further explain, one of the principles of experimental cinema and pornography, most especially feminist pornography, is to expand and transgress the aesthetic boundaries and stylistic standards of mainstream representation. So, in his account of access, Sconce relies on Christine Thompson's article, The Concept of Cinematic Access, which I'm quoting here, which defines access as a value that excludes the motivated use of a cinephile and the unity of the filmic access. Towards the end of her essays, Christine Thompson makes a remark about access as a particular instance of taste in the genre of experimental films, which emphasize the material aspect of film to the expense of narrative coherence and unity. Thompson concludes her essay suggesting that access opens to a whole understanding of the film perception, stressing other elements than the narrative. These aspects of access are common to both the avant-garde and the porn film. In both the genres, access is an added value, which, paraphrasing Thompson, could be described as an element that comes into play when motivation ends. In fact, in the two film forms, so the avant-garde and the pornographic film, access goes in the same direction. It opens up the paradigm of cinematic experience to non-diegetic and non-narrative dimensions. Before moving to the analysis of my case studies, I should clarify the status of pornography within the discourse of paradigm of taste, or the discourse on taste. Pornography has traditionally been associated with bad taste. Williams, in the article that I mentioned earlier on, places the porn film at the bottom of the gross genres. At the beginning of the article on the body genres, she specifies that, and I quote her here, there is no accounting for taste, especially in the realm of the gross. The pornographic film, as all body genres, solicits sensorial responses from the spectators based on the display of the human body and drawing on a system of access. Unlike for cinema, pornography maintains a marginal place within cultural discourse, and indeed, Sconce includes only soft pornography within his cinematic corpus. The rationale behind this categorization rests in the social, cultural, and institutional configuration of films, falling below or outside film culture's aesthetic parameters and judgment values. François Lyotard, for instance, considers pornography the epitome of mass conformism in communication. In his book, The Postmodern Condition, A Report on Knowledge, 1984, he argues that pornography perfectly abides, quote unquote, the endemic desire for reality with objects and situations capable of gratifying it. Beatrice Paul Preciado, in their book Testo Junkies, Sex, Drugs, and Biopolitics in the Pharmacopornographic Era, compares the relationship of the pornographic industry to the industry of culture to, quote, traffic in illegal drugs to the pharmaceutical industry, end of quote. As William remarks in the aforementioned book, pornography remains an outsider within national film industries and the framework of global media, in spite of the fact that it represents a major percentage of production output and consumption worldwide. Paradoxically, this bias includes feminist pornography, a discursive practice and a genre that advances a very different approach to sexual representation by means of stressing the importance of the authenticity, diversifying body images and sexual preferences, foregrounding consensual performance, and implementing labor equity within the porn industry. In what follows, I will strike some parallels between the feminist, queer, and activist agenda of the pornographic filmmakers and that of the avant-garde filmmaker proposed as case studies, pointing at actual crossovers within the cultural practices and aesthetics of the two forms in which these filmmakers work. So we start with the feminist queer pornographers of pornographic filmmakers as experimental filmmakers. So my first task will be to place these filmmakers was these filmmakers, in their context of production, highlighting common elements among their approaches to filmmaking and visual art practices, particularly as it concerns the representation of sexuality. So again, Candido Royale, and Sprinkle, and Courtney Trouble. The intention is to move away from standards norms of representation in the porn film, and this is the main drive in Candido Royale's feminist approach to pornography, as well as the queer take on the genre by Annie Sprinkle and Courtney Trouble. Royale's purpose in establishing film productions in 1984 was to create a niche market for heterosexual couples with a strong attention put on women's pleasure and a distinctive style. From this point of view, paraphrasing Bourdieu, Royale may be considered the aesthete of pornography, insofar as she tried to differentiate her videos from those of mainstream pornography, both ethically and aesthetically. As Royale herself put it, I set myself apart by creating movies that are high quality, genuinely erotic in a more sensual and realistic way. I tell stories, or at least set up a context for eroticism that reflect what I think women might like to see as well as men, end of quote. And Sprinkle's career is very similar to that of Royale's in that it develops from acting to directing and producing porn films and becomes more and more involved into pro-sex and pro-porn activism. Yet Sprinkle has never given up her role as a performer, and their approach to sexuality is much more polymorphous and experimental than that of Royale. In their live performances, films, and videos, Sprinkle uses methods drawing on experimental theater and burlesque. Sprinkle consolidated his expertise during the 70s and 80s, performing satirical gigs in strip clubs and in the off-Broadway scene. The photo here featured in the middle is from a burlesque act, the Nurse Sprinkle Sex Education Show. The Sprinkle was then invited to perform at the New York University. Like Royale, Sprinkle became a sex expert and moved this type of performative work on different media, frequently lecturing at universities and colleges. She earned a PhD in sexuology, and more recently became an exo-sex activist and artist in collaboration with a partner, the US CSC professor Elizabeth Stevens. Throughout their career, Sprinkle has used experimentation in various media and registers to develop a self-reflexive critique of pornography as a form of objectification and mystification of women's bodies, expanding to the exploration of queer, lesbian, and transgender sexuality. Similar to Sprinkle, Courtney Trouble, to the right, adopts body performance to criticize and transgress mainstream pornography with the affirmation of a different image of female queer sexuality. Trouble, the redefinition of the concept of authenticity in pornography, brings together realism and reflexivity. For Trouble, performance is also a form of power that they adopt, much like Royale and Sprinkle, against mainstream pornography or to counter normative representation of sexuality. Trouble, who is the co-founder of the queer porn movement, like Royale and Sprinkle, has a high education background and a strong commitment to sex activism and education. After completing 3 college degrees, Trouble is now pursuing their second master. They lecture at public events and universities and publishes articles about their work. On the side of avant-garde art and advanced cinema, the artist filmmakers that I selected, Carolee Schneemann, Barbara Hammer, and Peggy Auersch, share their aforementioned porn stars, producer, and activist filmmakers that I illustrated earlier on, a strong commitment to development of a distinctive representation of the female queer body and sexuality, as well as a pursuit of a feminist queer aesthetics. Schneemann has been exploring women's sexuality through the display of explicit sex acts in a number of works and through different media, including painting, photography, film, video, performance, installation, often using her own body as a medium of expression. The use of her body, often in the nude, has been the object of critiques, sometimes to her great regret, by feminists. Barbara Hammer is a visual artist working primarily in film and video, as well as performance pieces. They are considered a pioneer of queer cinema, Their work has been presented at international film festivals, galleries, and museums, and has received several awards. Hammer has made some of the pioneering works in lesbian filmmaking, has worked on health-related films regarding women's and queer activists' health crisis. Hammer views their aesthetics changing through times, from the tactile imagery of the 70s, featuring very famous films like Didactics, Women I Love, Super Dyke, Double Strength, to more formal work during the 80s, and to the more recent work on identity politics and political issues, especially developed in the documentary form. The last example is Peggy Alwash, an American visual artist and experimental filmmaker whose visual style and interests span a variety of aesthetics and topics, drawing on different genres and media. Like Schneemann and Hammer, Alwash works investigates female sexuality and gender relations, rejecting authority figures and presenting an ethnographic approach to characters. Formed in Pittsburgh, her hometown, she's part of an emerging generation of feminist filmmakers who place subjectivity and women's sexuality at the heart of their work, avoiding objectifying or beautifying female bodies. So, having introduced these filmmakers and identified the main traits of their work, I'd like to go back to the overall question regarding how they approach female sexuality on screen. A general argument is that these filmmakers' feminist queer interpretation of gender sexuality crosses boundaries in aesthetic perception and taste, both within and outside of the film forms with which each of them is associated. Firstly, a common feature in their approach to gender sexuality is the variety of stylistic registers and formal solutions that they deploy, which includes stylization combined with extreme realism, the resort to parody, performance, role-playing, which is deployed in throughout various media and formats. Fiona Atwood, in her article Sex Stuff, Theorizing the Sexualization of Culture, addresses the problem of defining sex in today's hypersexualized culture. Equin Williams' claim about the pervasiveness of discussion and representation of sex today, which is featured in her aforementioned Introduction to Porn Studies, Atwood advocates a better understanding of sex and sexuality across genres and between categories as a potential for democratizing sexual discourse. For Atwood, and I'm quoting here, we need a much clearer sense of the ways in which sexual sensibilities, tastes, practices, and discourses are developing and diversifying in the late modern period. The filmmakers I consider as case studies best exemplify this type of representation, emphasizing the materiality of the medium and the intersectionality of gender with diversified practices and identity politics. I don't have the time to discuss works from all the case studies I proposed, so I will just offer a short comparative analysis and not even comparative analysis of three of these filmmakers' works. So Fuses, and I just described them. Candida Royale is one of the first, and actually the first produced work by Fun Productions, Fun. It was not directed by her, but by Lauren Nini. And then Her Story Porn by Annie Sprinkle. So Fuses is a 22 minutes short that Schneemann filmed in her house in '65, featuring herself with her at the time partner, the musician James Tinney, making love. The film is a prototype of a narrative of self, intertwining experimentation and gender politics. So Schneemann made the film allegedly to differentiate the representation of sexuality in pornography, as well as to distinguish her work from other avant-garde representations of lovemaking, notably the one that Brakhage had made, amongst others, in Loving. And in an interview she says that she wanted to make a sort of a counter-representation of how in Loving Brakhage had represented herself and Jim Tinney in that film. The film explores heterosexual sex from a variety of points of view, going against both formulaic imagery of sexual acts and narrative cinema. And the film tries to recreate the rhythm and the dynamics of lovemaking through a cinematographic and an editing style that tries to create sensory responses. Femme, which is again the first production of Femme Productions in '84, has no plot. It's a series of vignettes, and each episode sets up a pretextual situation. There's a woman visiting an art gallery with two men gazing at her, a woman watching a soap in a bedroom and daydreaming about the male actor, a woman doing a photo shoot, and the photographer flirting with her. Each situation conveys a series of sexual fantasies which trigger the more traditional numbers in the porn repertoire. But in spite of this, the film retains its originality in that even the standard numbers are dealt with in a different way. In the Williams, in Hardcore Power Pleasure and the Frenzy Visible, '89, argues that in these vignettes, bodies are less caught in the involuntary act of catching pleasure, as in traditional porn, than, and I'm quoting here, in a performative mode of the jam session. So she says basically that the film is different, it's a typical product of Wayang, because of this, and because there is no focus on the genital organs, and because there is no attention to the money shot, the male orgasm. And finally, I would like to show a little clip, but I think I'm going over time, so maybe we can skip that. But I wanted to show, is there time? Yeah. But it's a little clip from her story of porn. And as you probably, I don't know if you're familiar with this film, in this film, I'll just say something about the film. Thank you. It's basically an overview of Annie Sprinkle's own experience and work in porn. And as Annie Sprinkle always does, it's very performative, it's very reflexive. It's herself doing lectures, basically, about what she's been doing in a long period of time, in different decades, basically. And she lectures in front of a podium. And then she explains, with a lot of irony, the different stages of her sexual performances. And here it's one of the latest, it's the one before the last one phase. And what I like about this particular representation is not just that it gives you an idea of her performance in the sexual as an ecosexual activist, but she's also touching on intersectional sexuality within porn representation. And here she's presenting herself as a mature porn performer. She touches on issues of body representation in the old body, the aging body, and of course the queer body, because she's just addressed her partner, her spouse, asking her to start the clip. And she's been very candid, as Annie always is, about her own age and about her aging body. And here she talks about orgasm and masturbation in nature. So eco-activism as a form, another form of pornography. So if you could just play the clip, it's just 10 seconds, and I'll just tell you why. Just let
so, no courses, no word about, no
maybe.
no Facebook analysis on Montreal.
Sorry. She's just saying that she doesn't have any.
This is all about how I meditate, which is to masturbate and meditate at the same time. The House of Tips filmed 6 different women masturbating to try to encourage other women to expand their masturbation repertoires. I came out as a dodecalophiliac. I find trees incredibly erotic. Now, I did something really outrageous for this movie. For the first time in my life, I grew out It's a form of prayer for me. It's a ritual. It's a way of keeping my body healthy, a way of releasing my emotions, expressing my emotions, getting in touch with who I really am. It's a way of feeling, getting into altered states, and it's preparation for dying, for letting go. A lot of times when I meditate, I have a little cry at the same time. I call it crygasm.
Okay.
I talk to so many women that tell me that sometimes when they're making love or when they have an orgasm.
Okay. So the part that you couldn't hear, she was saying that she was just natural, like no makeup and so on and so forth. If you know, and sprinkle it, that's particular for her. So as my conclusions, very quickly. So the works of the filmmakers you considered, those that I showed, typify Williams' argument in first studies that the avant-garde and pornography thing open new frontiers in their presentation of sexuality. What makes the work of these filmmakers especially significant is that they challenge dominant or traditional representation within their respective context of production, stretching expectations and paraphrasing Scones again, dissolving the boundaries of the diegesis into pro-filmic and existential realms. So the politics deployed by these filmmakers point to Bourdieu representational taste as a social construct. They demand that we look at cultural practices outside of their usual usages and reflect on the social as well as the economic hierarchies of sexual representation in visual culture, an area in which women had a lot at stake. Thank you. I think about till noon, is it? Or till a quarter now? Till noon?
Yeah, 20 minutes.
20 minutes? So about 20 minutes for questions.